What made this machine one of the most dangerous weapons in the world?
The Germans were convinced that they had created the holy grail of cryptography.
How could there be a carving of a modern helicopter on an ancient Egyptian inscription?
These shapes are instantly recognizable, but they are ancient, they are thousands of years old.
And can this 800-year-old device, covered in strange sayings, really predict the future?
In me are strange and hidden things. I am the revealer of secrets.
These are the most remarkable and mysterious objects on Earth. Hidden away in museums, laboratories, and storage rooms. Now, new research and technology can get under their skin like never before. We can rebuild them, pull them apart, and zoom in to reveal the unbelievable, the ancient, and the truly bizarre. These are the world's strangest things. This unassuming 80-year-old device looks like a typewriter fitted into a plain wooden box. But it is one of the greatest secret weapons in history.
What we are looking at is one of the most successful and most powerful code-making machines.
Now, using cutting-edge digital technology, we can bring it to life. And reveal its mystifying inner workings like never before. This is the Enigma machine. Measuring just 6 inches tall by 11 inches wide, inside is a complex network of wires connecting switches and rotors. Each rotor and plug can be set in a vast number of different combinations. It's a revolutionary technology built on thousands of years of code making and code breaking. An encryption machine considered uncrackable.
There are over 150 million combinations. And what that means is that if you could check one every second, it would take over 300 times the age of the universe to crack the code.
How does it work? What is its fatal flaw? What is the Enigma machine? At first glance, it may not look like much.
But looks can be deceiving. This humble little device was the Nazi secret weapon.
It's the end result of an arms race that has been going on for thousands of years.
The Enigma machine uses a cipher, and ciphers are a very ancient device for encoding and hiding information that you don't want someone else to read.
2,500 years ago, ciphers are already common. The cytale is a device believed to have been used by the Spartans as early as 400 BCE.
They would wrap a piece of fabric around the rod and then write their message across the fabric, so that when the fabric was unrolled, it would just look like a series of letters.
But it's got a fatal flaw.
If you had a rod of the same size, you could then wrap the fabric around and you'd be able to read the coded message.
Keeping messages secret becomes a never-ending battle.
You really get the kind of arms race where one side, or both sides really, are trying to develop increasingly sophisticated codes while their rivals are trying to develop increasingly sophisticated and effective forms of breaking those codes.
500 years later, Julius Caesar is using a substitution cipher.
All the letters throughout the message are just shifted by the same amount through the alphabet. Let's say they go 5 letters on, so all the A's become E's, all the B's become F's, and so forth.
But it also has a weakness. The letter substitution rule is fixed. Once Caesar's enemies figure out the rule, they can break every message. For 2,000 years, the battle rages between code makers and code breakers. Until the 1920s, when this strange and complex device appears.
The Germans were convinced that they had created the holy grail of cryptography, an unbreakable code.
The key to its success is its simple operation.
You type a letter on the keyboard, and then above it there's a panel of lights, also with every letter of the alphabet on them. And when you press a letter on the keyboard, a different letter lights up on that panel of lights.
Inside Enigma, each letter on the keyboard is connected electronically to the light board via 3 rotors. Within the rotors are a jumble of tiny wires that transpose one letter into another. This circuit passes through every rotor on the way to the light board. What makes Enigma unique is that every time a letter is pressed, the first rotor advances by 1 space. When it has been all the way around, the next rotor advances by 1 and the process begins again.
As those rotors keep on moving, it changes, randomizes the code. If I pressed A, I might get a Q. Then if I pressed A again, I might get an S. Press it again, I might get a T. And that pattern of apparently random letters makes it very, very hard to decode.
An electrical plug board on the front adds more ways to scramble the connections. Yet despite this complexity, decoding messages is child's play. All you need is another Enigma machine set up the same way.
All you have to do is type it into your Enigma machine, configured appropriately, and then the plain text should appear flashing on those lights. You can decode it 1 letter at a time, and you can tell your superior officer the coded message that's been sent.
It's the greatest encryption device the world has ever seen. The Germans are convinced it's uncrackable. Why have they gone to so much trouble? Using weak codes had pretty much cost the Germans the First World War. In January 1917, German Secretary of State Arthur Zimmermann sends an encrypted telegram to the German embassy in Mexico.
The content of the telegram was basically an offer to Mexico to get on the right side of the war while they had the chance, and as a reward, after the inevitable German victory, Mexico would be given New Mexico and other territorial parts of the United States.
But British code breakers intercept the message. Unknown to the Germans, they have already broken the old code used in the telegram. They pass the message to the Americans. Outraged, the US joins the fight and the war turns against Germany.
It's a huge intelligence failure and a diplomatic disaster for the Germans. So as the war ends, the Germans felt highly motivated to develop a new coding system, and that's where the Enigma machine comes in.
The first people to spot the arrival of Enigma are Polish intelligence. They've been keeping a close eye on Germany, with very good reason.
The Treaty of Versailles that had recreated the nation of Poland, part of that was built on former territory of the German Empire. So they were literally sitting on what many Germans considered German land.
But 8 years after the end of the war, Polish eavesdropping runs into trouble.
All of a sudden, in 1926, it's like a wall comes down. They simply can't decipher the codes that the Germans are using anymore.
Enigma has arrived. For 2 years, the Polish are deaf to everything the German military is saying. In 1928, they finally catch a break.
The Warsaw Customs Office receives a package labeled radio parts. they get an urgent phone call from the Germans saying, oh, this was sent to you by accident, we need it back immediately. It was really the urgency of the calls that alerted them to the fact that they had something much more important than merely radio parts.
The package contains a civilian version of Enigma.
This finally gives them the opportunity to look at the interior workings of this code-making device that has been confounding their best efforts at decryption for so long.
The question is, can they break the code? The Enigma machine. Germany believes it's unbreakable. That doesn't stop Polish intelligence from trying. In 1932, using a captured civilian Enigma and other scavenged data, mathematician Marian Rejewski figures out how the military versions are wired. The Poles can once again listen in on everything the Germans say. But they are chasing a moving target. Enigma is evolving.
The Germans continue to adapt their Enigma machines. They add new rotors, they wire it differently. They basically make the code more and more complex, more and more difficult to break.
In response, Rejewski devises his own machine to fight Enigma. He calls it the cryptological bomb, or bomba in Polish.
It's assembled from bits of the Enigma machine as they understand it. And it's a device that is able to, over time, run through the different possible permutations that the Enigma machine is spitting out.
But in September 1939, Rejewski's attack on Enigma is cut short. Hitler invades Poland.
The Polish codebreakers do manage to escape the invasion, and they turn over a lot of the notes they had collected, as well as much of their equipment, to Bletchley Park, which is now going to become the center of the British codebreaking efforts.
The Germans continue to evolve Enigma. It grows increasingly complex. British efforts fail to break it fast enough to be useful. Meanwhile, German U-boats are decimating Allied ships carrying vital supplies from America.
The Germans really have the advantage. They have the perfect weapon for stopping those convoys and for choking off this vital supply line. The Unterseeboot, the U-boat, an invisible, implacable, deadly enemy.
They have to break the Enigma messages sent to the U-boats before the Atlantic supply line is cut off and the war is lost. One man thinks he knows how.
Alan Turing is really one of the great mathematical geniuses of the age. He is a Cambridge graduate, absolutely brilliant guy, very eccentric, and it is into his hands that this all-important mission of cracking the Enigma code falls.
Turing supersizes the Polish ideas and builds a mega bomba.
This was an absolutely incredible computing machine, rotating drums, miles of wire, and able to crunch through far more combinations of Enigma codes than any individual human could possibly manage.
Turing knows that even his huge bombs can't crack Enigma fast enough. His genius is to combine them with a crucial flaw he spotted. Not in the machine, but in the operators.
The human flaw was that humans send predictable messages. For example, one of the most common types of message was a weather report. And that means if you get a message you think might be a weather report, you've got a word that you can look for inside it. At a very minimum, Wetter, the German word for weather.
These known or probable words are called cribs. Turing combines them with a second flaw. And this one is in the supposedly unbreakable Enigma machine itself.
A letter can never be encrypted to itself. So say I press a letter A, it goes through this whole tangle of wires. But because the A has to be connected to something, it can never actually come back and become a letter A in the ciphertext.
Turing can now narrow the search for solutions, using the cribs as a guide.
Say you're looking for the word Veta, you can slide through your text, and if you find any of the letters in the right place, you know that isn't your word, and so you can keep on looking. And once you've found this tiny little chink in the armour, you can use it to decode the rest of the message.
Now that Turing's bombs don't have to test every possible solution, they quickly churn through the remaining possibilities. Enigma is broken. Some experts claim that cracking Enigma shortens the war by up to 2 years. Germany fails to produce an unbreakable code. But Enigma starts something big.
In many ways, the Enigma contest, the contest between the code makers and the code breakers, is the beginning of the information age. It's the first time that intelligence and access to intelligence have become the absolute focus of a major military effort.
Even 80 years later, the lessons of Enigma still apply. The German military added more rotors to multiply the complexity in Enigma. Technology today still does the same thing.
The modern analogue of that is 128 or 256-bit encryption. Every time you add an extra bit, you add twice as many patterns that have to be searched through.
But as Turing shows with Enigma, there's still one flaw no one can avoid: humans.
All it takes is one person in your company to click on a dodgy link or open a dodgy attachment and enter their password, and suddenly hackers can have access to your network. It's the human beings who are an unescapable part of the equation that mean that codes get cracked.
So the incredible Enigma machine and the battle to break it is still teaching us vital lessons in the modern world, even if the computers have gotten a tiny bit faster. This is the ancient Egyptian city of Abydos, almost 300 miles south of Cairo. Here, in the ruins of a 3,000-year-old temple to the god Osiris, stands a stone door lintel. Carved into its surface is an impossible image: a helicopter. What's going on? Now, using the latest imaging technology, we're reconstructing this bizarre artifact in minute detail. The lintel is around 6 feet long and 2 feet high. Its sandstone surface is carved with cryptic hieroglyphs celebrating the reign of the mighty pharaoh Seti I. But amongst them is what clearly looks like a modern attack helicopter, with rotor blades, a sleek body, and a tail boom. And even stranger, it's not unique. 60 miles away, in the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, is a carving that looks strikingly similar to an electric light bulb. It has a glass globe, a filament, and even a set of electrical cables. There are no shortage of extraordinary theories which believe that these really represent advanced technology.
Ancient Egypt is often a magnet for fringe ideas and people who attribute the origin of these ancient objects to someone else.
Aliens and time travel feature prominently in such wild theories. But despite appearances, experts are certain these do not represent modern technologies.
These shapes look instantly recognizable to us as modern viewers. But in fact, they are ancient, they are thousands of years older. So the question really becomes, what could they be?
What do these bizarre carvings mean? Who made them? Why is there a modern aircraft on a 3,000-year-old temple wall? An image carved in the wall of an ancient Egyptian temple appears to show a modern helicopter.
This temple was the mortuary temple of a pharaoh called Seti I. Seti I may not be a household name in the same way that Tutankhamun is. Nevertheless, he achieved a huge amount. He really stabilized the country after a period of fragmentation and difficulty. He achieved a number of military victories, which he then carved on his amazing temples up and down Egypt.
Despite the apparent evidence in the carving, experts are confident that helicopters are not one of his tools of war. The problem for them is that you can't simply conjure up a helicopter out of thin air.
A helicopter requires a number of innovations in order to literally get off the ground. Understanding the aerodynamics for building the rotor, you need to have an energy source that can provide enough power. You also need some notion of control.
And evidence of other essential technologies, from precision metal engineering to lubricants, gears, and engines, are notable in Egyptian archaeology only by their absence. A light bulb is no easier. You need to generate electricity. You need cables. And to make the bulb, you require a key skill: glass blowing, which is a problem.
The ancient Egyptians didn't do glass blowing. That was a technology that was invented by the Romans.
But if this isn't a light bulb, and this isn't a helicopter, then what on earth are they? Solving the mystery means diving into the dog-eat-dog world of the ancient pharaohs.
The so-called helicopter inscription appears at the Temple of Osiris in Abydos. This temple was the mortuary temple of a pharaoh called Seti I. That's where everything about this pharaoh was meant to be immortalized, written for the ages in the most perfect way possible.
The carvings in the temple tell a story of Seti as a mighty, all-conquering king. The helicopter carving starts life as one of these gushing inscriptions.
It reads, "He who renews the births, strong with the sword, who subjugates the 9 bows." And the 9 bows was a sort of shorthand to refer to Egypt's enemies.
The inscription celebrates Seti's great achievements for eternity. At least it does until he dies.
And then his son, Ramses II, comes along. Ramses II is known as Ramses the Great. He's a huge deal when it comes to New Kingdom pharaohs. And certainly at this point in time, he is second to none.
But along with Ramses' undoubted ability comes a sizable ego. He decides that all the dedications to his father's greatness will look much better with his name on them instead.
So what Ramses II does is that he comes in, he fills in the name of his father, Seti I, with plaster, and then carves in his own name.
On the helicopter lintel, it no longer proclaims Seti as the great leader that crushes Egypt's enemies, but Ramses. But the 3,000 years since then has taken its toll on Ramses' updates.
Some plaster has fallen out of one of the pieces of writing.
What we see today is a combination of one hieroglyph carved on top of another.
So together they look like a helicopter, when apart, actually they look quite distinct.
So this astonishing carving has a very human origin.
These symbols are not, in fact, evidence of advanced technologies years before we realized, or alien cultures coming down and building the pyramids. If anything, these symbols are evidence of the ego of Pharaoh.
That's one mystery solved. But the carving at Dendera is in its original state, with no alterations after it is first carved. So if it's not a light bulb, what exactly is it? Despite appearances, Egyptologists are confident this incredible carving in the Temple of Hathor is not an electric light, because they've seen it before.
Ancient Egyptian people of the upper classes, certainly, would have been able to look at these images and understand instantly what they were about. This is actually a very traditional and central motif to ancient Egyptian religion. The filament is actually a snake, which we think represents the god Atum. The socket is actually a lotus flower, which stands for rebirth. The glass bulb itself seems to be representative of the air bubble that is the sky. And finally, at the bottom, there is actually something that looks like a cable, but it's actually a bark. And this is representative of the bark that would have carried the sun across the sky. So you put all of these elements together. Surprise, surprise, the set of carvings is not actually a light bulb, but actually tells us a huge amount about ancient Egyptian theology.
So why is it that we can convince ourselves we see things in these carvings that just aren't there? It's not even limited to monumental Egyptian works. We see strange things everywhere. We see Jesus in a slice of toast, faces on rocks, ducks in clouds, even faces on the surface of Mars. We just keep seeing stuff that isn't there. What's going on? To find out, scientists have used magnetoencephalography to directly measure electrical activity in our brains. They've discovered that we often identify these images before we're even conscious of what we're looking at. So we recognize the face before the slice of toast, or the helicopter before the ancient carving. The technical term for this ability to conjure up images that aren't there is pareidolia.
Pareidolia is a way our brain operates to efficiently come up with patterns and recognize patterns. But at the same time, it can end up creating flaws, and we'll see patterns where they don't necessarily exist.
But this strange effect actually keeps us alive.
Part of this is about sheer survival, because if we see some ambiguous shape or shadow amongst the leaves and we think that's the head of a tiger, then we run. If we're wrong in that interpretation, we haven't really lost anything. But if we didn't make it and it really was a tiger, then we're done for.
Pareidolia relies on spotting things that are familiar to us, which explains a lot. Nobody bats an eyelid over the carvings at Dendera until after the invention of the electrical light in 1878. Only then do visitors spot the similarities. Which also explains why no one notices the helicopter until the 1980s. Someday we may see something even more extraordinary in these hieroglyphs. We just haven't invented it yet. Locked away in a glass cabinet in the British Museum is a mysterious metal mechanism covered in strange sayings.
I am the revealer of secrets. In me are marvels of wisdom and strange and hidden things.
This is a machine from the past, created to tell the future. Now, using cutting-edge technology, we can examine this mysterious device with forensic precision. The geomancy machine. In all of human civilization, there is nothing even vaguely similar to this. There isn't a single reference to it in any book or manuscript. It's roughly twice the size of an iPad and strikingly beautiful.
It has this intricate metalwork with inlays of gold and silver.
This complex item features a range of sliders, dials, and Arabic writing.
This extraordinary object is nearly 800 years old. It holds the key to mysteries lost to the ages. What secrets is it hiding? How does it work? What exactly is it? This strange medieval device is 800 years old. But what is it? Written on its front is an Arabic inscription describing it. But it reads like a riddle.
The possessor of eloquence and the silent speaker. And through my speech arise desires and fears. The judicious one hides their secret thoughts, but I reveal them.
What does it all mean? The inscriptions may be obscure, but there are other markings on the face of the machine that do offer clues.
On the sliders and dials, we find matrices of dots, which correspond to similar matrices of dots, which we see in books about divination.
These patterns of dots appear in texts from Spain, Africa, and England as far back as the 12th century. All of them are about an ancient practice called geomancy.
The practice of geomancy is the prediction of fate or the future from the study of the casting of objects onto the ground and looking at how they fall.
So this is a geomancy device for telling the future. But how on earth does it all work?
If we look at the origins of the term geomancy, it comes from the Greek, Gaia for earth, and Mantea for prophecy.
Geomancy is a form of divination. That's fortune-telling or prophecy derived from natural phenomena or objects.
There is pyromancy, the studying of the patterns of flames to foretell the future, or hydromancy, looking at patterns on still bodies of water, or even crystallomancy, the looking into crystal balls to tell the future.
Geomancy uses sand or soil for the same purpose.
Geomancy was practiced throughout the Islamic world. They had a name for it, which was ilm al-raml, basically literally the science of sand or the knowledge of sand to tell the future.
With the expansion of Islam, this form of geomancy reaches into the European world. Richard II had a text on geomancy.
And he isn't alone. Several European monarchs have books on geomancy in their libraries.
European politics in the medieval period was quite volatile, so they certainly wanted to read the future and determine what their fate might be, including their kingdom.
It probably makes sense to the rulers of the land to incorporate the land itself in predicting the future. But the basic method of geomancy can be practiced by anyone, from a prince to a pauper.
You start out by a casting. You draw a seemingly random collection of dots whilst holding an idea in your mind, the question that you want to ask. You eventually come up with all these dots.
After each cast, you add up the total number of dots produced.
And if it comes out as an odd number, you just draw one dot. And if it's an even number, you draw two dots.
It takes 4 casts to produce one geomantic column, called a mother. Each row contains either 1 or 2 dots. Then you repeat this entire process 3 times. You end up with 4 mother patterns.
It's a lot like binary mathematics, but instead of 1 and 0, you're using odd and even. And you just carry on through those calculations, using those 2 different states to generate a whole load of new states.
Next, you take the pattern of dots from the top row of mothers And from this, you generate a daughter. Each row of mother dots produces another daughter for a total of 4 patterns. Then from each pair of mothers and daughters, you create nieces.
You move across those rows, and if you've got an even number, you put a 2-dot symbol. If you've got an odd number, you just put a single dot.
You end up with 16 characters. This is called a geomantic tableau. It's the job of the geomancer to read the future by interpreting it. Generating the tableau is simple math that looks much more complex than it actually is. Perhaps intentionally.
16 times 16 times 16 times 16 means you've got 65,536 combinations in total.
It seems like an enormously complex task for a device built almost 700 years before the first computer. So how does the geomancy machine work? This bizarre object is the geomancy machine. How does it work? The answer lies behind its highly decorated back cover. Now all the individual knobs and sliders of the mechanism are visible. And one thing is immediately clear. None of them are connected to each other. Turning one setting has no effect on any of the others.
The geomancy machine is in some senses not a machine at all. What it is a set of disconnected dials and levers which are there to act as a kind of object of reference or aide-memoire.
The geomancy machine doesn't calculate your fortune. It's just a fancy upgrade to scratching marks in the ground based on your casts. Not that it matters, because it's how you interpret the tableau that really counts.
It's not as though they have a really standard interpretation. You go away and there are literally books and books of information about how to interpret every possible outcome.
It's the geomancer's job to produce a prediction from the calculated symbols.
The problem with this process is, although it seems very mathematical and rigorous, it's actually just a very elaborate way of generating one of 65,536 random numbers and then assigning some kind of deeper meaning to it.
The whole combination allows you to have a wide range of interpretations. The actual interpretation effectively seems made up. It seems that it could be anything.
So, the machine is just geomancy without getting your hands dirty. It says as much in its own inscriptions.
I have spread out the surface of my face out of humility and have prepared it as a substitute for earth.
Making this the ultimate deluxe accessory for an A-list geomancer. The only one of its kind in the world. So where does such a unique and extraordinary device come from? And who made it?
The creator of the geomancy machine is actually inscribed. His name is given, Muhammad Khutluk al-Muwasli. So this is a person actually telling us where he comes from.
That name translates as Muhammad, son of Khutluk from Muwasli, or to use its modern name, Mosul, in what is now Iraq.
In the 13th century, Mosul was one of the great Islamic cities of the world. It was a great commercial center connected to the Silk Road, rich in its commercial resources, and also an intellectual center.
So it's a place that we would expect craftsmen like Muhammad al-Khutluk to have been located.
One of medieval Mosul's signature trades is the skillful crafting of one metal into another. Exactly the techniques visible on the geomancy machine.
It's a very highly developed piece with multiple metals mixed together and worked in high detail. So clearly whoever made it had a lot of expertise, and Mosul was a perfect place where such a device could have been made.
But what inspires them to produce a geomancy machine instead of more decorative vases?
The device is really trying to be showy. It's trying to elevate geomancy practice, to effectively take it from a kind of back alley practice to a kind of scientific, professional practice.
And that makes perfect sense. Because 1200 years ago, science is flourishing in the Arabic world.
The 8th through the 13th centuries were the Islamic Golden Age. We see the invention of the syringe, of forceps, of surgery to remove cataracts. We see an enhancement of knowledge in astronomy. We see mathematic advances, including things like the decimal point and more complex fractions, as well as algebraic innovations.
Algebra, in fact, is an Arabic word. The word algorithm is another word that we use today. That was also an Arabic word. And all these developed during the time of the Islamic Golden Age.
This is the world that gives birth to the geomancy machine.
But given the popularity of geomancy in the Arabic world, why has just one machine ever been found? The clue may be in the date of the machine's manufacture. Engraved on it is the Muslim year 639, or 1241 to 1242 in the Christian calendar. Just 16 years later, in 1258, the Golden Age of Islam is snuffed out.
The really big blow occurred with the invasion of the Mongols to the east.
The Mongol hordes, led by the grandson of the great Genghis Khan, destroy the accumulated knowledge of Baghdad. Mosques are destroyed, hospitals are destroyed. They cast so many books into the river it was said to run black with ink.
So this device is produced during the last hurrah of the great Islamic Golden Age. Everything about it is extraordinary, from its craftsmanship to its function and its history. It's a window into the incredible creativity and energy of the medieval Islamic world. It's just a shame it completely fails to predict the coming of the Mongols that ends it all.